Good day. Welcome to Saints and Sinners. I am so thrilled to be here with you today. My name is Julie Enszer, and I am going to be in conversation with the wonderful Judy Grahn for this next session. I know that many of you listening to us are both familiar with Judy's work and that she is a beloved figure to you. But I still am going to give some basic introductory information about Judy for the one or two folks in the audience who do not already know her brilliance. Judy Grahn is an internationally known poet, author, and cultural theorist. Eruptions of Inanna, which will be published in May of 2021, is her 17th published book. An early gay activist who walked the first picket at the White House for gay rights in 1965, Judy later co-founded Gay Women's Liberation and the Women's Press Collective. Her subjects range from LGBT history and mythology to feminist critiques of current crises, new origin theories of inclusion, what makes us human, taking anti-racism personally, and stories of how to engage with creature minds and spirits. She writes about and teaches her own poetry and also that of Sumerian poets interacting with the goddess Inanna. Dr. Grahn holds a PhD in Integral Studies, Women's Spirituality, and researched her dissertation in South India. She has received many awards and honors, including Grand Marshal of 2 Gay Pride parades, several Lifetime Achievement Awards, including the Fred Cody Award for Literature and Social Service, 2 American Book Awards, a Stonewall Award, 2 Lambda Literary Awards, and the Demeter Award for Leadership in Women's Spirituality from the Association for the Study of Women in Mythology. In 2019, she was inducted into the Tennessee Williams Festival Saints and Sinners Hall of Fame. Publishers Triangle established the Judy Grahn Nonfiction Award in 1996. She is currently Associated Distinguished Professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies PhD program in Transpersonal Psychology. I'm so thrilled to be here with Judy today. We're going to talk about her new book and a variety of other things. So please join me in welcoming Judy Grahn into this conversation. Judy, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing fine this afternoon. I'm in California. It's going to be 65 degrees. So it's balmy and that's lovely and nothing's on fire right now around me. So I'm feeling pretty good.
That's excellent. That's excellent. You look great. It's exciting to see you. I wanted to start out our conversation because by talking about how you just turned 80 last July, the big milestone birthday. I'm sure impacted a little bit by the COVID pandemic quarantining, but still a joyful milestone for you and for us all. I wonder if you'd start out by telling us first a little bit about what it feels like to be able to draw personally from such a long history and perspective that you have both on the LGBT movement, the United States, and our world broadly. Has it changed you and how you work?
Yes, actually it has. I mean, first off, COVID changed how I worked by making me stay home, not traveling. So I became more prolific, I think. But also just being older, I have a longer view and I'm starting to get a handle on what I've been doing. I can see, the arc of it, and I can go back and actually revise things that I've done and fit them to each other and understand them a lot better than just sort of being on a train rushing through the stations. So I like that a lot. And I've been, as you say, I've been doing these origin stories, especially And I see now that I started there. That's what I was doing very early on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It strikes me that it, it seems from your work that you kind of enter the work in a really very intuitive way, and that you um, it almost feels to me sometimes reading your work that you're listening to an inner voice that's speaking, and that your work is sort of working around and discovering that. And part of why, I opened with talking about your age is the way that your work really provides us a history as a community, but a history that feels so visceral and so intuitive to our lived experience. And you started talking about your work beginning with origin stories, and so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, first off, I just want to say you're really very perceptive talking about this intuitive part of me that I wrote about extensively in a book that's going to come out of Red Hen Press, Touching Creatures, Touching Spirit, that I actually inherited a spirit. And it took me 40 years or more to to know what questions to ask my secretive parents and have them acknowledge that, in fact, that's true, that my father had a spirit, that it's a spirit that's inherited. And it's really obvious I got it as well, that we call intuition. But I am always listening to something that knows more than I do and will tell me what I must do, whether I agree or not. And when I follow that path, I'm really on my path, which is lovely. So anyway, to say where this all started, um, I didn't imagine that I was going to be doing origin stories when I was 25 and started my writing. I actually was very confused about what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't have any idea. I knew how to write. I had studied that as a kid. Um, I just didn't know why. I didn't know what to connect it to, what greater movement. But my partner at the time and I we knew we needed a massive changes in order to have lives as LGBT people, and we weren't me. We were Dykes, which is very close to it's very close to non-binary kind of state. And we knew that word too, because she had introduced me to some of the gay slang words um, that are part of the what was then a very underground culture. But we joined in 65. Let's see, I'm wrong. It's late 64. In November 64, we went to New York and we heard a lecture, um, and it included information about joining Mattachine Society, and we joined uh, because there was an active Mattachine um, in Washington, D.C., Mattachine Society that was founded by Harry Hay back in 1949. And this was now 1965 that we joined it, and we participated in their picketing of the White House um, that spring in May. And Frank Kameny was leading that group. And he, besides wanting to get a security clearance so he could work for the government, he was also telling us that the psychology industry, if we can say that, had pathologized us, and this was a major thing to take on. Um, and I absorbed that. So even though we stopped Mattachine, right after this picket and before they did the next one, which was in of the Liberty Bell, at the Liberty Bell, um, I the first two things that I wrote had to do with the psychology and changing that, of what it was really like to be a lesbian, of being truthful about that. Um,
And
and
of course, you're referencing, one of the things I know you're referencing is that extraordinary poem, Edward the Dyke.
yes, the Psychoanalysis of Edward the Dyke. It's a satire of a lesbian and her psychotherapist, and he is wanting to change her into a real woman. It's amazing to me that one applies to lesbian life, also to trans life, gay life, obviously too, and is still in print.
Mm-hmm.
It was in
Still profoundly meaningful.
Anthology. Pardon me? Go ahead.
Still,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and that's both the good and the bad news. That's, telling us how deeply rooted the anti-homosexualism is in our culture. It just permeates everything, and it has to be dismantled piece by piece and replaced with better origin stories. That's now what I see. That's what I started doing. And it really was Mattachine Society under Frank's leadership that set me on that course. I can see that now. At the time, I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was just like trying to find the railroad tracks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so, as you sort of put these pieces together, it really strikes me that in your work around origin stories, there's two parts of it that are so crucial. I think about Edward the Dyke, and we'll come to talking about another big work of yours, but one piece of it is understanding and identify and naming so that it can be challenged, the structural oppression that people are experiencing. That really, the way the psychoanalysis of Edward the Dyke identifies both psychoanalysis as a discipline and a practice, but also the way that one person, the psychoanalyst in the poem, sort of is a part of that structure. So it's constantly making these connections between the structural and individuals.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so I think like that structural work is one part of it. And then when we can identify what the system is, you come with these origin stories that allow us to imagine a different system.
Yes. I think that's right. And what writing that piece taught me, I couldn't get it into place at all. I tore it up and stomped on it and cursed and yelled. I mean, I was very upset.
Mm-hmm.
And then here came this intuition that told me exactly what to do, which was that not only to satirize the psychoanalyst and his system, but that Edward also had to change. And so I understood, I think, from that the writer must be immersed in the whole question and must be present as a voice, guiding it through, and as someone who needs to learn along the way. Well, I think that is illustrated, in that little satiric piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I make plenty of fun of Edward
Mm-hmm.
and her idealism and her naivete,
Yeah.
and her just trying to go along with it,
Yeah.
Which doesn't work.
Yeah.
And Frank and Barbara Giddings, who's another name we should know, those two leaders in 73, they set up a confrontation with the psychoanalytic community and challenged them. And as a consequence, the DSM was changed and homosexuality became depathologized
Mm-hmm.
and started to be simply sexual orientation.
Yeah.
One of several.
So that was, that's one of your earliest pieces and one of your so profoundly influential works. Then, of course, I just want to mention the Common Woman poems, right, which come out shortly after that, and I think ignite feminism and lesbian feminism in such a profound way. I can't even recount the number of times where people talk about common women as a way to galvanize feminists and as a way to galvanize lesbians, and use it with so much deference to your formation of that in the 1970s. And I think it's just been something that has so shaped what has happened over the past 50 years. I don't know if you want to provide a few reflections, but I think that's another moment of you sort of doing this intuitive work that sparks imagination and power for all of us.
And it's all in that magical word common.
Mhm.
You know, I was thinking about the common man from the 19th century and the labor union movement, and that my dad was a part of. And I said, why not common women? And then came the magic, because when it's applied to women, it's a whole different word. All of a sudden, it has erotic components to it automatically. It has class components to it beyond what common man has.
Mhm.
A common man is one thing. A common woman is something else altogether, and maybe somebody ostracized for being sluttish. You know what I mean? It's like, whoa. Oh, so sexual category goes into that. And of course, lesbian is sexual category. So it was like, oh, this really opens a lot of doors. And then it took off. So I kept using the word common. Adrienne Rich talked about common dreams. Um, Audre Lorde was addressing common differences. Uh, and the institution now, the institute that is promoting my work is calling it commonality. You're saying that the philosophy that I'm putting together should be called commonality. It's the younger folks doing this, and I'm like, what? Why are you saying that? And they're like, well, because it's all over your work. And when I go back, it is.
Mhm.
The common word is there. It's still in the work that I'm doing. Common mind and common heart and common spirit.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think this sort of gets to another really vital component of your work and your legacy, which is really as um, a theorist, right? A feminist theorist, a queer theorist. And, one of the books that I think captures that so powerfully is this book from 1984 of yours, Another Mother Tongue. And for folks unfamiliar with this book, you want to rush out and buy it right now and read it. I was reading it about a year ago when you and I were working on the new project that we'll come to talk about. And it was my fourth or fifth reading of it. And I was struck by how continually present and meaningful it seems, even as the world has changed so much since I first read it in the late 1980s. In a nutshell, it was published in 1984. It won the Gay Book Award from the American Library Association. And it's transformative. It opened up new imaginative spaces for queer people, inviting us to understand that there was a queer culture that could be seen, grappled with, created, and recreated, and that it mattered. It mattered both to queer people, but also had implications for the broad worlds that we live in. The thing I love, I mean, I want you to talk about whatever you want to in relationship to Another Mother Tongue, but you were 44 when it published. What kind of gave you the chutzpah to put all of that out there at that moment?
Uh, I have to back up, to what gave me the chutzpah to do everything that went before that as well, and co-founding a movement and so on. And that is that I was just so lost that even after Mattachine, it was like, well, how do I contribute? What do I do? What is this? And I fell into a coma. It was actually brought on by a cat. You can trust them to make changes in your life, and this one certainly did. So, for 3 days, I was unconscious. Um, Came out with a big loss of vocabulary, and old ways fell away, and I was very happy relearning to talk and think and all of that. I was very happy, and I was very fearless because, a near-death experience will do that for you. It's like, well, what have I got to lose? I need to just dive in. I began calling myself a lesbian out loud, and I began calling myself a poet, even though I wasn't one yet. And I didn't think I was until after 73. Then I was willing to call myself a poet after a woman is talking to death. So anyway, that kind of nothing to loseness has sort of stayed with me. But I was writing something else. I was writing this ginormous book that would eventually be Blood, Bread, and Roses. And I was going to have a chapter that would be another mother tongue. And then this spirit that you talked about so benignly gripped me, by the nose ring, as they would have said in Mesopotamia, and said, no, you're going to write another mother tongue first. So I did. I didn't know why. What was the hurry? I knew there was a hurry. I even spent a small fortune, which to have some money was just incredible. And I bought a computer, which cut about a year off of the writing of it. And then when it came out and AIDS was full blown, and I was getting letters and feedback, and the gay men went crazy for it because they had been decimated by the anti-gay movements that had grown up from the right and from their parents saying, get out, we don't ever want to see you again. And all of these horrible, harsh, dreadful things happening to them. And now they had this dreadful illness, trying to keep each other together. It was a very moving era, of course. And another mother tongue played a part in that it was a comfort. It was sustaining. And they wrote me letters, sometimes really long, heartbreaking letters about it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, now I get why I did this one first. But I didn't know that when I started it. I didn't know that when I said this has to be number one. So what do you say about that? With, Spirit saw ahead of me and snagged me and said, get on it, get on this horse, ride it.
Yeah.
So, and it is a book based in a list of slang words, bad words that we were called. I'm not sure when I learned to maybe it was way back in Edward the Dyke time, just walk fearlessly toward what you're afraid of and see what it's made of. And so it was a learning experience for me to do that. And I also made myself a character, in the book. As the narrator voice. But the slang words, again, opened doors and worlds and said, look at this narrow little place of negativity that was American homosexuality is not what the history says. It's not what the ethnography says. It's not what the rest of the world says, even if you just know how to listen and read through things and, use a kind of a poet's view, which is associative and metaphoric. And, so there's methods that go with this. And here came this book, and it just took off and consumed me for a couple of years, just going around reading it and reading it and reading it and reading it to people. Mm-hmm. Get it to them.
And I wanted to revisit this book because I feel like there's a similar spirit, a similar method, a similar approach between Another Mother Tongue and this new book that's coming out in May, Eruptions of Inanna. which continues, it seems to me, continues some of the conversations. And even I would describe them as obsessions. You don't have to take on that word. But that there's these continuing sort of looking at our history and our origin stories and breaking them apart and opening them up in new ways. So will you tell us a little bit about Eruptions of Inanna?
Oh, well, yes, I'll be so happy to do that. And I'll hold it up.
Oh, yeah, you have the galley.
I have the galley. I'll brag about this incredible design they did for it. Eruptions of Inanna, Justice, Gender, and Erotic Power is the subtitle of it. And what a journey that's been. And that really, for me, it started in 1979. I started working from a feminist perspective, looking for a deity that was female and powerful and still with us. I wanted all those things. So, I wrote Queen of Wands, and you write something and it pulls more of itself toward you. People start bringing you things, and telling you stories. So people did that. Somebody said, Helen of Troy. So I explored Helen of Troy. This person said, Helen of Troy was actually a goddess in Sparta. That's interesting. I started exploring that. And that path just leads back and back and back. And eventually, by 84, somebody had come to work with me, wanted to do a writing workshop with me. And she brought new translations of the work dedicated to goddess Inanna. This work is for at least 4,300 years old, and it's probably much older than that. Some of it written in a women's language. This is in the Mesopotamian Valley, the so-called Cradle of Civilization. There are several such cradles around the world, but this one directly impacts our country, our Bible, our sense of history, our food that was brought to Europe with the farmers that poured out of the Fertile Crescent, because they created city-states. And in any event, they're very important to us, and so is this particular goddess. So in the course of working with this woman, Betty DeShong met her, and she translated some work and rendered it into poetry, working with Sumerian translators. And I got to witness that. It was just an incredible gift to me. So out of that, I had the confidence to keep going, to say, as a poet, what does this poetry look like? And at Oxford, there's a group of Sumerian specialists who keep giving us, for downloading purposes, the raw translations. So you can work with them, and I did.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love, and well, of course, you and I were talking about your speech from the Outright Conference in 1990, where you talk about the goddess Inanna and the need to reimagine that origin story. And so it was lovely to sort of see now, 30 years later, there's the continued reimagination of that. I wondered if you wanted to read a little bit of the opening of the book for folks to get some flavor of what they have in store for them when they read it.
Sure. 6,000 years ago, at least, people settled along and between two Mesopotamian rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. Some people say Tigris, in the area that's called the Fertile Crescent. A rich civilization, Sumer, grew there, lasting thousands of years and producing lively agriculture, trade, arts, and sciences, including the art of writing itself. In addition to records and accounts, Sumerians excelled in writing down their mythology, songs, and praise poems. The earliest poet known by name anywhere is Enheduanna, who was a high priestess who lived in the city-state of Ur. She wrote 3 long poems about her long exile and suffering, and at the same time, she was exalting Inanna, exalted her to be the highest, the goddess of love, beauty, justice, and so much more. Sumerian poets, nearly all of them anonymous, praised their pantheon of major gods in written language, but no one had more lines of poems survive the ages than the goddess Inanna. So my retelling of 8 myths about her that were written by the Sumerian poets, beginning at least 4,260 years ago, are at the heart of this book, Eruptions of Inanna. I am personally enthralled by the lush qualities of the poetries and intriguing plots of the stories of Inanna. But as a poet myself, there are other reasons I'm drawn to understanding this work. I see in the ancient Sumerian poetry pre-biblical roots of justice, gender, and erotic power. Even as a child, I was a spiritual person, called on to read my poetry in Bible class, and given a handsome Bible by my parents. As I grew older, I was beyond dismayed by the Bible, first by the exclusion of homosexuals from categories of sacredness, and then by the absence of female presence in the divinity. And then as I became more socially conscious, by the definition of light as good and dark as bad, in the New Testament especially, which only exacerbates social and psychological divisions. And later, I also became acutely aware of the split between human beings and the rest of nature, a split I learned did not exist in indigenous religions and practices. What accounted for all this and what could be done became the major explorations of my life. What can be learned through reading literature that preceded the Bible and in important ways fed into its wisdom? And what was left out that we could value now?
Thank you, Judy. So beautiful. So the book unfolds like another mother tongue in giving queer communities a sense of central myths that shape our lives. In Eruptions of Inanna, you really look at Job, Gilgamesh, and Inanna as vehicles for how queer people can be included in big origin stories of our world.
Yes.
And then I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the subtitle, right? And if you might talk a little bit about how justice, gender, and erotic power come into this book.
Well, I think by now it's really well known that she embodies these qualities. Less emphasis maybe is put on the gender piece of it. But her stories of justice they're delightful to me. She embodied the quality of immanence in nature, so she could take any kind of form. And in one of her stories, she is looking for a transgressor, someone who transgressed against her and against the land. And she takes the form of a rainbow in order to see where he is when he's hiding in the mountains. And there's another part where she brings the whole land to a dead halt using her menstrual powers. And I think hasn't been recognized as that's what her powers is. It's called blood, but her blood could only be menstrual blood because there was no war going on. And there are other reasons to believe that. And because I've researched menstruation so thoroughly, which we didn't talk about, I was able to see that. And then I was able to see these other things as well. And it all adds up and makes sense that that would be one of her powers. And it's an unusual power. It's a power that implies solidarity among women. Um, so that is definitely one of her powers of justice. And there are other stories of her with justice that they just endear me because she transforms a bad act into something that's in alignment with her quality of love and compassion and caring for the land and that sort of thing. She's a very ecologically present and protective of the land as much as she is protective of female power. So
Yeah.
that's one piece of it. Yeah. And she's accompanied by these little, they're not little, these transgender characters, not just two, but a number of different forms that show up in her story, and they accompany her, some of them, in her quest for justice, which is really, I think, crucially important. So that.
Yeah. And really gives us such a different perspective on what justice might look like when we're gender aware. Yeah.
Yes, it's more along the lines of restorative justice, I think, than it is. Certainly, it's not an eye for an eye.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's something else. It's more what's the word? Alchemical. It's more alchemical than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been busy, right? Because you have Eruptions of Inanna coming out. The other book, Touching Creature, Touching Spirit. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that. You talked about it a little bit at the beginning of our conversation, but do you want to add something about that book as well?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, it that has to do. I love both of these books so much. I was just floating in some kind of wonderful place. My spouse, my Dyke spouse, was so happy I was working on them because they are full of joy and they filled me with joy. And so I was in a state of joy while I was working on them, as well as learning all kinds of things. But Touching Creatures, Touching Spirit, the subtitle is Living in a Sentient World. And it's really a book about consciousness. I didn't start out thinking that's what it was going to be about. I wanted to tell stories because I'm not a fiction writer, really. And I wanted to know how to tell stories. And so I gave myself an assignment that I would tell stories, and there had to be a creature at the center of the stories. And the creature stories had to be true. They had to have happened. And I could manipulate the human characters any way I wanted to, but the creature stories are true. And that spilled over into spirit and Rupert Sheldrake's idea that the sun is conscious, and if the sun is conscious, why isn't the whole cosmos conscious? So, it develops as it goes along, but it's stories. And it overlaps with Inanna because she is eminence in nature. She is actually the life force that animates everything. So she's paradoxical. She can burn the city down.
Mm-hmm. And so then, in addition to these two projects, you had, while you were quarantining last summer and then watching the United States have another moment of reckoning with racial justice, you returned to another work of yours, which is also, I have to say, another favorite of mine, because the poem is Descent to the Roses of a Family, right? And part of, I love this poem for all the reasons that you're writing about it in this new edition of it, but also for its own origin story, because of course it first published through Common Lives, Lesbian Lives as an insert in that extraordinary lesbian feminist periodical that came out of Iowa City. And they published it, as I understand it, as a newsprint insert into one of the issues.
Well, they started to do that. I don't know that they did, but they might have done that. Common Lives, Lesbian Lives, and there's that word common again.
Yep, yep.
But yes, that was the initial poem, and that one, it was a difficult. It's been difficult for people to address white supremacy, to know how to do it. So I'm really happy to have had an opportunity. Not had the opportunity would be like the spirit grabbed me by the nose ring again and said, you're going to do this book because you can't get out on the street with Black Lives Matter for two reasons. One is my age and my phobia about crowds, and then COVID. So, how can I contribute? I said, well, I'll do something I've been wanting to do anyway, which is to take one of the poems from another book that Red Hen published of my 9-part social justice poems, Hanging on Our Own Bones. And I selected Descent to the Roses of a Family because I thought, now is the time that maybe there will be a lot of open ears among white people, especially, to examine what white is, where it comes from, what it means, what we can do about it, how we can transform it into something else. So that's what this is all about. This is field notes, backstory, and the poem itself, with the idea that intellectualizing is fine, learning is fine, but it only just goes so far. It doesn't get to the root. And that's what I'm trying to do always. I'm always trying to get to the root of it, because that's where the alchemical thing can happen. That's where there can be an actual transformation. So that this book is there, and we're looking for teachers, workshop workers. I thank you so much for, praising the poem as you just did. Thank you, and remembering when it was published the first time around. But this time, this is what it looks like. It's got an interesting cover and a subtitle that is A Poet's Journey into Anti-Racism and Personal Social Healing.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think one of the things that connects, and I've not read the new, I'm looking forward to reading Touching Creatures, Touching Spirit. I've not read it yet, but I know what links Eruptions of Inanna and Descent of the Roses of the Family is the way that you really help people kaleidoscope between the structural systems of power that we're all living in and negotiating, and what our personal lives are within them, and how to live and think and act and be in ways that are responsible, that are reflective, and that are rooted in these ideas of justice and in modes of transformation to make the world more just for everyone.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. So they're really, I see sort of these connections in all of the parts of your work. So tell us what's your driving life force? What keeps you working and creating and being so productive?
Well, I don't know. I don't really know. It's like, wait, where is this coming from? Some days I think that it's because my mother was schizophrenic. And I have read that there's something that whatever makes a person schizophrenic, this is one research line somebody went on, also keeps them living a very long time. So my mother had a very, I would say, elegant older age. She never had much of anything, but Arizona took good care of her. And she was happy always. She had this, happy isn't really the word, elfin is maybe the word, but this optimistic spirit, that's very childlike. And somehow I think I have that too. And when it's working, it's really nice. And when it isn't, it's really awful. But it mostly is working because I have really good people around me who take such good care of me. It's like, how could I not do this? Given that I know how to do it and I'm interested in it, how could I not do this? This is the horse and carriage that I've been given, and they've taken me this way. So I have confidence that what I'm doing is going to be valuable to somebody. I have that confidence most of the time. And then I have a critic that says, "Rah," we all deal with that. And I just deal with that and wait, and it goes away. And this other one comes back in and says, let's do this. This is challenging. You might learn something from this. So I'm like, ooh, it's really scary. And they're like, so what? Life is scary. And you can either be scared and hide under the bed, or you can be scared and write your next book.
Well, as readers, we are all so grateful that you're always making that choice to write the next book. Judy, before I ask my final question, is there anything that you want to add that I've missed asking you about, that you feel that your beloved audience of readers and fans might like to hear from you?
Well, I just want to say about Eruptions that I'm so tickled. I know you wanted to ask me, what brought me to write this, and I wanted to say it was you who did, because you offered me, write a book for Sinister Wisdom, and make it short. So I said, okay, I'll do 3 chapters. And then, you're just so good. I just kept pushing. And so it's okay, 4 chapters. Okay, well, 5 chapters. Oh, an index, which was your idea and was great. So here is this book. But I want to say this is a serious book. And it's also all about different kinds of love. So it's a joyful book in many ways, and that the life spirit is like that. It's serious. It has components. It has us human beings trying to explain it, and we are crazy as loons. So it's a book that addresses worldviews of life and death, and it addresses gender relations and the hero's journey and so on. But it is also about love. And that love is erotic love. It's not only erotic love, but erotic love turns out to be the very first aesthetic principle, according to an Indian philosopher whose name I can't recall right this minute. The other thing I want to say about it is I traveled in India. I was blessed to do that 4 different times and spent I've been there like for the total amount of time of like 6 months, immersed in the culture and witnessing the rituals. And these 2 cultures, ancient India and ancient Mesopotamia, were very close. They shared lots and lots of things. And one of the things they shared was this goddess that in India still exists and is called Shakti. And that is the closest thing to the closest compilation of characteristics to Inanna that I've ever run across. And because I traveled there, I could see there was just, I could interpret it so much better because I'd had this on the ground experience. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I think it adds a dimension
Mhm,
that otherwise wouldn't have been there. I would have been really speculating, and now I'm not.
mhm. That's great. That's great. So now we've been a whole year now in quarantine.
Yeah.
What's bringing you pleasure right now in the from the quarantine, from the uprisings around racial justice, from
Mhm.
all of the challenges and all of the things that we've experienced around the past year? Where's your pleasure source?
Well, it's also it's in the optimism that that uh, this is a place where the door is open now. The earth is cracked a little bit. And by earth, I mean human beings right now are being asked to make some choices. And so it opens the possibility that we could make some better ones than we have. I think there are lots of people, especially young people, working on this, and I think that's great.
Mhm.
Um, the reality of the split in America, the white psyche that split and splits off the dark from itself, um, is revealed as it hasn't been revealed in my lifetime. Even in the 60s, it wasn't as rawly revealed, I think, as it is now. Um, or maybe I'm just older and see it from a longer perspective. I don't know. But that gives me pleasure, but it gives me optimism that now there's plenty to do and ways to do it. And that's what makes lives worth having and living. Um, but then personally, what gives me pleasure, besides my little dog, um, and my life, with a great lover partner and with a best friend who, uh, subsidizes us living in California. Otherwise, we couldn't afford it. Um, I love gardening and I love cooking. Very
Beautiful.
stay-at-home things. I do not love hiking. I'm not drawn to sailing. When I was younger, all that was fine. But I really do. I love cooking, and I'm learning again to cook, learning to cook gluten-free things. That's challenging. Um, I'm learning to garden in a climate that is disrupted and it's not the same as it used to be. And the local creatures, have learned how to raid it and climb up on the tables and nibble the little seedlings and stuff like that. So I have to be protective in certain ways, but protective of them at the same time. I think it's wanting to teach me a kind of generosity that I don't have. It's like the squirrels are not actually stealing my onion bulbs because these aren't my onion bulbs to begin with. They live here too, you know what I mean? And they like potatoes and onions for breakfast. So do I.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Judy. The book that we've been talking about, so many of your books, but three new books out now: Eruptions of Inanna, Touching Creatures, Touching Spirits, and Descent to the Roses of a Family. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you today, to work with you on Eruptions of Inanna. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to enjoying all of these books and the future books that you write, and provided you don't become too distracted by the garden.
I don't think I will. And thank you, Julie. Thank you for everything that you've done for, making this beautiful book for me, which I really, really appreciate.
Yes, great pleasure. And thank you to the Saints and Sinners Literary Festival. It's been my pleasure to be in conversation with Judy Grahn today, and I hope that you all have a great celebration.